What you're about to see has never been caught on camera before at a British diplomatic summit. The son of the US President, Barron Trump, pointed at a royal guard and told his security to remove him from the shot. But the guard didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge the command, and within minutes, surrounded by press, diplomats and MOD officials, Barron found himself standing face to face with a man who hadn't said a single word until that moment. What he said, it halted the cameras, it froze the aides, and it brought the entire courtyard to a stop. Watch closely, because this guard's response changed everything. Before we reveal the full story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Without further ado, let's get into it. The April morning had that particular London weight to it, crisp but heavy, the kind of air that carries whispers of rain and the faint echo of history pressing against your shoulders. Carlton House Terrace stood like a limestone monument to empire, its columns catching the pale sun, Union Jack hanging motionless from the portico, as if even the wind knew to show respect. Inside the courtyard, staff moved with the practiced quiet of people who understood that today mattered, even if tomorrow would forget it. Tripods were adjusted with surgical precision. Small wooden podium centered just so beneath the engraved crest of the Foreign Office. Coffee cups clinked against bone china saucers, and somewhere near the east entrance, two aides were having a polite but firm disagreement about the exact placement of the Canadian flag. This wasn't meant to be grand. No red carpets, no monarchs, no 21 gun salutes. Just a diplomatic soft touch, the memo had called it. Youth envoys from 6 nations, carefully selected press, and the son of a former American president, scheduled to deliver remarks on international cooperation. The kind of event designed to feel spontaneous while being choreographed down to the last camera angle. And there, at the western edge of the courtyard, where the stone path curved toward the ceremonial stairs, stood Lance Corporal Elias Flint. Been motionless since 0800 hours. Scarlet tunic pressed to perfection, white leather belt cutting a precise line across his chest, bearskin cap level as a horizon line. Shadow it cast gave his face the carved quality of cathedral stone, all sharp angles and stillness that seemed to draw depth from silence itself. Elias was 33, though the uniform made him ageless. He'd spent 7 years with 3 Pare before the transfer to ceremonial duty with the Coldstream Guards, a move that had raised eyebrows among mates who remembered him as the type to volunteer for night raids, not palace rotations. But those mates hadn't been there when a roadside bomb outside Lashkar Gah had taken 3 men from his section. Hadn't seen him carry Private Tommy Mitchell 2 kilometers through Taliban fire with a shattered collarbone. Hadn't watched him stand over a flag-draped coffin in Wootton Bassett, silent as stone, while cameras clicked and strangers wept. Elias' ceremonial duty wasn't performance. It was preservation. Every morning he pinned on that tunic. He was carrying something forward, something that mattered more than morning television or tourist photographs. His grandfather had done the same at Buck House in 1953, standing watch as Elizabeth was crowned. Different wars, same weight. When the convoy of black SUVs rolled through the gates 30 minutes ahead of schedule, Elias didn't shift, didn't glance, didn't prepare. He was already prepared, had been since the moment he'd first learned to stand at attention as a 16-year-old cadet, back when the world still felt large enough to contain his dreams. The lead vehicle was pristine, window-tinted, chrome bumpers catching the pale morning light like mirrors. Second followed, then a third. The British security liaison, a compact woman with salt and pepper hair, and the air of someone perpetually 3 steps ahead of whatever crisis was brewing, checked her watch and frowned. They weren't due until 10:30. It was barely 50 minutes past 9. Someone whispered urgently into a comms device. Too late. The rear door of the middle SUV swung open with the soft thunk of German engineering, and out stepped Barron Trump. He was taller than the photos suggested, lean in that aristocratic way that comes from good genes and better nutrition. Navy suit, crisp white shirt, open at the collar, black Oxfords polished to mirror brightness. His hair, once the subject of late-night television mockery, was now styled with the precision of someone who understood that every photograph was a statement. The Secret Service detail that flanked him moved with practiced efficiency, scanning sightlines and exit routes, while a small coterie of American aides and one sharply dressed publicist clutching a media folder trailed behind. A freelance camera operator, pre-cleared and unobtrusive, kept his lens low and respectful. Barron paused at the edge of the courtyard, scanning the limestone columns and iron lamps like a director evaluating a set he wasn't entirely convinced by. His eyes took in the podium, the flags, the carefully arranged seating area for the international delegates. Then they found Elias. "Where exactly am I supposed to stand?" he asked, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone accustomed to having his questions answered immediately. The British liaison stepped forward with diplomatic smoothness. "Just here, sir, in front of the west elevation. We've positioned you with the Union Jack and FCO crest as backdrop. The stonework should frame beautifully for the cameras." Barron followed her gesture, then stopped dead. "No," he said, flat as pavement. "That's not going to work." The liaison's smile flickered. "Is there a problem with the positioning, sir?" Barron tilted his chin toward the far side of the frame, where Elias stood beneath the portico arch, a scarlet monument to immobility. "What's with the toy soldier?" The silence that followed was the kind that seems to echo even in open spaces. A pigeon landed on a nearby ledge, took one look at the assembled humans below, and immediately reconsidered its choice of perches. "That's a ceremonial royal guard, sir," the liaison said carefully. "Part of today's formal security detail. He's been assigned to that post by the Ministry of Defence." Barron raised one hand, cutting her off mid-explanation. "I'm not doing a photo op with him lurking in the background, like we're at some theme park. It looks ridiculous. Get him moved." The American publicist was already touching her earpiece, speaking in the clipped tones of someone solving problems in real time. A member of the Secret Service detail, clean-shaven and wearing aviator sunglasses that reflected the morning sun, nodded once and began walking toward Elias's position with the measured confidence of a man who'd never been told no by someone in a costume. The British liaison took a careful breath, the kind that precedes diplomatic language designed to say no without causing offence. "Sir, that guard post is part of established MOD protocol. The position can't be altered without formal authorization from—" "Then formally authorize it," Barron interrupted, not bothering to look at her. His attention was already back on the podium setup. "He's standing there like a department store mannequin. I don't do props." Near the refreshment station, a junior British aide caught the eye of his supervisor and mouthed a single word. "Christ." The Secret Service agent was now 15 feet from the ceremonial rope line, approaching with the steady gait of someone who'd moved obstinate people before. His reflection caught in the brass fittings of the rope stanchions as he drew closer to where Elias stood. Who hadn't moved? Not when the convoy arrived. Not when voices raised. Not when shadows shifted across his peripheral vision. The scarlet wool of his tunic rose and fell with measured breathing, but otherwise he might have been carved from the same limestone as the building behind him. Somewhere behind a column, a UK press officer was whispering urgently into her radio. "Get me Dalton, now. Tell her we've got a live situation." The agent slowed as he reached the edge of the ceremonial rope, those aviator lenses reflecting the morning light as he studied the perfectly still figure before him. He raised one hand, perhaps to gesture, perhaps to speak. Elias didn't acknowledge him, didn't even blink. The moment stretched like tension wire pulled tight, ready to snap at the first wrong word or misplaced gesture. Around the courtyard, conversations had gradually died away. The camera operator lowered his lens slightly. A diplomat in a charcoal suit leaned back on his heels, suddenly more interested in watching than chatting. One of the young international delegates shifted sideways, trying to get a better view of whatever was unfolding near the rope line. In Elias's mind, the limestone courtyard faded, replaced by something hotter, dustier, infinitely more dangerous. Afghanistan, 2011. Forward Operating Base Price. He'd been posted outside the command tent during a visit from some Pentagon officials when a local contractor had tried to breach the perimeter. Not violently, just persistently, insisting he had authorization that clearly didn't exist. The contractor had argued, gestured, even offered money. But Elias had stood his ground, silent and immovable, until the situation resolved itself. Later, the base commander had pulled him aside. Sometimes, the officer had said, the most important thing a soldier can do is absolutely nothing. That lesson had served him in Helmand, when Taliban fighters tried to draw fire from concealed positions. It had served him at state funerals when grieving family members had approached the honor guard, desperate for comfort that protocol wouldn't allow him to provide. And it would serve him now in this limestone courtyard, facing down a man who thought ceremonial duty was about decoration rather than dedication. The Secret Service agent's hand hovered uncertainly in the air between them. Behind him, Barron was growing visibly impatient, turning to an aide and muttering something about British bureaucracy and why nothing ever moved quickly in this country. And still, Elias didn't move. Not when footsteps approached from the direction of the main building, not when a new voice, crisp and authoritative, cut through the morning air. "You are not authorized to approach that guardsman." Every head in the courtyard turned toward the source of the voice. Miss Olivia Dalton, Director of Ceremonial Affairs, stepped through the archway with the calm authority of someone who'd been managing diplomatic crises since before most of the people present had learned to tie their shoes. Her grey hair was pinned with military precision, her charcoal suit tailored to perfection. She carried a leather folder under one arm, and the weight of institutional memory in her stride. The Secret Service agent stepped back instinctively, recognizing authority even when it wore a skirt instead of a uniform. Dalton walked directly to the rope line and stopped exactly where the agent had hesitated moments before. She glanced up at Elias once, not a nod or a signal, just acknowledgement between professionals who understood the weight of duty. Then she turned to face the American agent. "That rope line exists for a reason," she said, her voice carrying no more volume than necessary. "The guardsman is on ceremonial post under Ministry of Defense jurisdiction. He is not a photo prop. He is not decoration. And he is certainly not subject to repositioning at the request of foreign nationals, regardless of their pedigree." The agent's mouth opened, then closed again. Whatever training Quantico had provided for diplomatic situations, this particular scenario apparently hadn't been covered. Barron, noting the exchange, stepped forward now. His tone remained polished, but carried an edge of frustration that suggested he wasn't accustomed to extended negotiations over simple requests. "Miss Dalton, is it? I appreciate your attention to protocol, but this is supposed to be a goodwill event, not a military parade. We're here to build bridges between our nations, not stand on ceremony over every little tradition." He gestured broadly toward Elias. "Surely you can just shift him a few feet to the left. It's not like I'm asking you to disband the monarchy." Dalton's expression didn't change, but something in her posture suggested that she'd heard this particular argument before, probably from men who'd confused wealth with wisdom. "I'm afraid not, sir. That guardsman holds his post at the direction of Her Majesty's government. Moving him would require formal authorization from the Ministry of Defense, a process that typically takes several days and, in this instance, would need to be justified by security concerns rather than photographic preferences." Barron's jaw tightened slightly. "This is about optics, isn't it? The whole point of having him there is to look impressive for the cameras." Dalton's reply came without hesitation. "The point of having him there, sir, is to represent the continuity of British military tradition during formal diplomatic proceedings. The cameras are incidental." Something in her tone suggested that she'd just drawn a line in the limestone, and everyone present understood it. Barron stepped closer, lowering his voice to the register he probably used in boardrooms when trying to close difficult deals. "Look, I understand that you people take this stuff seriously, but surely there's some flexibility here. I'm not asking for the crown jewels, just a clear background for a 5-minute speech about international cooperation." Dalton folded her hands behind her back, with the precision of someone who'd learned military bearing before learning diplomacy. "The guardsman will remain at his post until his shift ends, or he receives lawful orders to stand down. Neither of those conditions will be met by photographic concerns." For a moment, the two of them faced each other across the rope line, like negotiators representing different centuries. Around them, the courtyard had gone quiet again, staff and delegates alike sensing that something larger than a simple scheduling conflict was playing out in front of them. Then Barron straightened, his expression shifting from diplomatic frustration to something closer to personal challenge. "Fine," he said. "Let's see how immovable he really is." And with that, he stepped past Dalton and walked directly to the rope line. Now he stood close enough to see the individual threads in Elias's scarlet tunic, close enough to notice the slight condensation that formed when the guardsman's breath met the cool morning air, close enough to understand that what he'd dismissed as decoration was actually something far more substantial. "You don't even look real," he said, his voice just loud enough to carry to the small crowd that had gathered nearby. Elias didn't respond, didn't even blink. "Do you ever talk?" Barron asked, more to himself than anyone else. "Or do you just stand there like a museum piece all day?" The silence stretched longer now, taking on weight. Somewhere behind the columns, a photographer was adjusting his lens settings, sensing that whatever was happening might be worth documenting. "Look, just step 6 feet to the left, okay?" Barron said, his voice rising slightly. "You're not protecting anything here. You're just part of the scenery, and right now, you're in my scenery." The rope line stood between them, barely waist high, but suddenly feeling like the Berlin Wall. Elias remained perfectly still, his posture speaking a language that needed no translation. From somewhere near the refreshment station, one of the American aides, young, confident, and clearly unversed in the subtleties of British ceremony, stepped forward. "Sir, I can just move the rope. It'll only take a second." He reached toward the brass stanchion. "Stop." The word cut through the morning air like a blade, sharp and final. The aide's hand froze above the brass fitting, his confidence evaporating like morning mist. Every head turned toward the source of the command. The man approaching didn't hurry, but somehow covered the distance from the main building to the rope line in what seemed like seconds. General Alistair Lockidge moved with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades commanding attention without raising his voice. Silver-haired, charcoal coat over pressed trousers, he carried authority the way some men carry briefcases, as a natural extension of themselves. Dalton stepped aside slightly, not in deference but in recognition. The general had commanded the entire household division during his active years, had overseen more ceremonial transitions than most diplomats had state dinners. His presence changed the mathematics of the moment. Barron straightened involuntarily, the way men do when they recognize military bearing even in civilian clothes. Lockidge didn't acknowledge him immediately. Instead, he looked directly at Elias, his eyes holding the guardsman's for a moment that seemed to carry years of shared understanding. "You may speak freely, guardsman." It wasn't a request. It wasn't permission. It was an order, delivered with the quiet certainty of a man who'd never doubted his authority to give it. And for the first time all morning, Lance Corporal Elias Flint moved. Just slightly, just enough. His head turned with deliberate precision until his eyes met Barron's directly. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. A bird landed on a nearby ledge and immediately took flight again, as if sensing that the air itself had become too thick to navigate. When Elias spoke, his voice carried the calm certainty of someone who'd chosen his words carefully and meant every one of them. "I'm not here to decorate your photographs, sir. I'm here to guard history." The silence that followed was absolute. Camera shutters that had been whispering softly in the background went quiet. Someone near the main entrance coughed and immediately regretted the sound. The American aide, who'd reached for the stanchion, slowly lowered his hand as if it had suddenly become too heavy to hold up. Barron blinked, not in retreat, but in recognition. The line had been drawn, not with aggression or ceremony, but with simple truth spoken by a man who understood the weight of what he carried. For a moment, the son of a former president found himself looking into the eyes of someone who'd stood watch over more than photo opportunities, who'd carried more than ceremonial rifles, who'd guarded more than just buildings. He opened his mouth as if to respond, then seemed to realize that anything he said now would only diminish what had just happened. Instead, he took a step back from the rope line. General Lockidge finally turned toward him, his expression neither hostile nor particularly friendly. "There's value," he said quietly, "in understanding when you're not the most important person in the room." Barron looked at him for a long moment, processing. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edge. "Do your guards always talk during duty?" Lockidge offered the faintest suggestion of a smile. "Only when they have something worth saying." The young man, because suddenly standing in front of these two men, that's what Barron was, nodded slowly. Something in his posture had changed, not surrender but calculation. The look of someone reassessing a situation that had proven more complex than initially thought. He glanced back at Elias, who had already returned to position, head forward, eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the courtyard walls. The guardsman stood exactly as he had before, as if the exchange had never happened at all. But it had happened, and everyone present knew it. The silence stretched for another few moments, long enough for the weight of what had transpired to settle into the limestone and mortar around them. Then Barron exhaled softly and stepped away from the rope line entirely. "Fine," he said, his voice quiet now. "We'll shoot from the other angle." He walked back toward the staging area, but his movement had changed, less aggressive, more thoughtful. The edge of entitlement had been replaced by something that might have been respect, or at least recognition. As he reached the podium area, he paused and looked back once more. Elias hadn't moved, hadn't acknowledged him, hadn't changed position by so much as an inch. The shadow of his bare skin still painted the same precise line across his brow. And then, without fanfare or explanation, Barron raised 2 fingers to his temple in a gesture that wasn't quite a salute, but wasn't nothing either. Brief, understated, but unmistakable to anyone who knew military protocol. Elias didn't return it. Couldn't, by regulation and duty, but for just a moment his eyes found Barron's again. And that was enough. The rest of the morning proceeded according to schedule. Speeches were delivered, photographs were taken, diplomatic pleasantries were exchanged with practiced efficiency. The international delegates asked thoughtful questions about trade cooperation and cultural exchange. The press took notes and captured sound bites that would be condensed into 30-second segments for evening broadcasts. But the story that would be whispered between diplomatic staff over coffee, shared in secure messages between allied nations, and remembered long after the official transcript was filed away, had already been written in those few minutes near the rope line. When Elias's shift ended at precisely 1300 hours, he was relieved with the same ceremony that marked every changing of the guard. Measured footsteps on limestone, quiet commands exchanged between officers, the seamless transition from one silent sentinel to another. He walked through the gates of Carlton House Terrace without looking back, the scarlet tunic folded carefully under his arm, the weight of the morning settling into his shoulders like familiar armour. Inside the barracks at Wellington, in the dim corridor lined with lockers and benches, he changed from ceremonial red to civilian clothes with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. The younger guards were talking quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing in his direction with something that might have been awe or might have been confusion. "Did you really tell off a Trump one of them asked finally. Elias looked at him while buttoning his civilian jacket. I told him what my post was for. That's not what the others are saying. Others weren't there. He reached into his locker and pulled out a small fabric pouch, military issue, worn soft at the seams from years of handling. Inside was a photograph, a woman in RAF blues standing in front of a transport aircraft, arms folded, expression fierce beneath her cap. His mother, taken somewhere over the North Sea in 1985. Behind the photo, a folded card with handwriting he recognized. You don't speak often, so when you do, it matters. A. Lockidge. The note was 3 years old, given to him after a state funeral where he'd briefly broken protocol to comfort a grieving child who'd approached the honor guard. One sentence, delivered so quietly that only Elias had heard it, but it had changed the trajectory of a little boy's worst day. He looked at the card for a moment, then tucked it back behind his mother's photograph and returned both to the pouch. The locker door closed with a soft click. Would you do it again? The younger guard asked. Elias shouldered his kit bag and walked toward the corridor entrance. If ordered to speak, he said without turning around, yes. Then he was gone, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps and the understanding that some silences are louder than words, and some words are worth breaking silence for. 3 hours later, in a media tent just beyond the Foreign Office grounds, a junior press officer was reviewing footage from the morning's event. Most of it was standard diplomatic fare. Wide shots of flags, close-ups of handshakes, carefully framed speeches about international cooperation. But one clip kept surfacing in internal message threads, shared between departments with comments like, "Have you seen this?" and "Thought you should know." It wasn't part of the official program, wasn't scheduled or scripted or prepared. Just a guardsman and a young man having a conversation that lasted less than 30 seconds, but somehow felt like it mattered more than all the prepared remarks combined. The press officer played it once more, then quietly forwarded it to 3 different supervisors with a simple message: discuss at briefing. By evening, the clip had reached diplomatic pouches across Europe. Not for public release, not for press distribution, but for the quiet edification of people who understood that sometimes the most important conversations happen between the lines of formal protocol. When the Foreign Office published its official media gallery from the summit 2 days later, one photograph drew particular attention from those who'd been there. Wide frame, professional composition, Barron Trump at the podium, international flags arranged behind him, limestone architecture providing gravitas to the scene, and there, in the background but unmistakably present, stood a single figure in scarlet beneath the ceremonial arch. He hadn't been cropped out, hadn't been minimized or relegated to the margins. He was simply there, as he'd always been, as he would continue to be long after the speeches were forgotten and the delegates had returned to their respective nations. Standing guard, not over a building or a photograph or a moment, but over the idea that some things don't move, don't bend, don't compromise, regardless of who's asking. And in a world where everything seemed negotiable, that immobility had become its own form of power. So here's what we want to know. If you were standing in that guard's position, would you have spoken when ordered, or would you have maintained silence no matter what? And what do you think about that 2-finger gesture from Barron Trump? Was it genuine respect or just another photo opportunity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your perspectives help shape the stories we tell. If this reminded you why tradition still matters in a world that changes too fast, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. We post a brand new Royal Guard story every day, each one proving that these men in red are anything but decorative. And if you know someone who thinks ceremonial duty is just for show, send them this video. Show them what happens when immovable meets unstoppable. More stories are already appearing on your screen. Click one now, and we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place, with another reminder that some things are worth standing for.